life.
Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with another episode of Ask Dr. Adriana. I'm really excited today to have as my guest my good friend and collaborator, TJ Woodward. Welcome, TJ.
Thank you, Adriana. Always wonderful being with you. You know, it's over the years and our collaboration, I'm even thinking back to the first time I met you all those years ago, and there was just so much synchronicity. So I just love what emerges in our conversations and so incredibly grateful.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I love our festive colors. If you're watching this in the future, we're recording this during holiday time, right between Christmas and New Year's. And the theme that I've really been exploring in my sessions a lot is family and conflict. And we did a thing on bullies. It's just because being around family and being around loved ones, I'm going to put that loosely in quotes, at the holidays can really bring up a lot of stuff for people. And that's what's been coming up in sessions. So I thought today would be a great time to have a conversation about conflict. And you and I look at this a lot in our work. And you've written 3 amazing books: Conscious Being, Conscious Recovery, and most recently, Conscious Creation. We've collaborated on those workbooks, but I want to highlight something specific from Conscious Recovery. When we teach the workshops in rehab facilities, you have a module in there on conflict. And in that, you talk about what are the root causes of conflict. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, there are many different ways to answer this, but I wanted to actually start with also naming the conflict that's happening in our world right now and
Yes.
being on social media. And if you watch the news, which I would say the number one way I can reduce conflict immediately is to turn off the TV, which I did 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, actually, and I feel lighter. But in the curriculum, Conscious Recovery, we identify in the beginning of the conflict group, we put 3 things out as a discussion point, looking at the roots of addiction. One of them, and Adriana, you might have to help me with all of them. One of them I know is the need to be right. Another one is misperception, right? So we can talk more about both of those. And then the other one, and I think perhaps the most significant one as we talk about what's happening both in our world and maybe in our families, is wanting the other person to change. And so obviously we're going to dive into each of those, but I'll review them. So it's misperception, it is needing to be right, and it's wanting other people to change. And I think all 3 of those are rich topics in themselves.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. Let's start with misperceptions. This one is sort of the obvious, right? Like when I'm not hearing what you're saying or understanding what you're saying, I'm hearing something different. I think of filters. I think of the lenses through which we see ourselves in the world. And I also think about core false beliefs. What are those for people who have never heard that term?
Yeah, core false belief. Core false beliefs are a framework, especially in conscious recovery and conscious creation, looking at the ideas and the beliefs that we're holding about ourselves. And really, even more than that, it's the frequency that gets created based on those beliefs. So we often have them buried in the unconscious. Sometimes we're not even aware of it, right? For example, I was walking around not realizing that I had a narrative, internal dialogue, but again, more than that, kind of a point of view energetically. And, that is an important part of the conversation, because I was walking around with core false beliefs like I'm not lovable and I'm not worthy. And every situation I would see through that filter. In other words, I'm vibrating at this frequency. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. Someone says something to me or even looks at me in a particular way, and it touches that. If I'm not aware of it, and again, I'm sure it was at least a decade that I wasn't aware of it. I just thought people were toxic or people were not giving me what I needed or weren't available for me. So if I haven't at least started to heal that, or if I'm not working on looking at that as really a core way of being in the world, I'm going to project it outward. In other words, I'm going to say, my boss is the jerk. Why does my partner not hear me? Why do I keep finding myself in these same relationships over and over again? Those are indicators that there's something much deeper happening. And ultimately, it's really the only place we can heal it, because people have been trying to change the world for centuries. And how has that gone? Yes, we may make some incremental changes, but true happiness is an inside job.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much, we talk about how much of communication happens non-verbally, right? It's energetic. It's, of course, body language, tone of voice, all of those things, right? And and a lot of times we're not even conscious, right? We're not even conscious sometimes, like that we've rolled our eyes or we've made like a certain look or whatever it may be that can be interpreted, in a way that maybe we're not even intending. Or yeah, same thing. If someone's looking in my direction, I might assume, oh, they're judging me. They don't like my outfit. They think I'm ugly. They think I look stupid, whatever. And they might literally like not even be able to see that far. They just happen to be looking in that general direction. Texting is another one, oh my goodness, with texting and emails now, how much miscommunication, misperception happens. What did you mean by that emoji? What did you mean by that? Whatever statement you put in the text, right?
Yeah, and life is perception. When you were speaking, I was reminded of a story that I think is so perfect with this conversation. Some years ago, my nephew, he was born in 2003. So he was about a year and a half old. And at the time I was dating a guy who had a nephew about the same age. And the four of us were at dinner in a part of the country that I might have a judgment about. Right. It wasn't like my idea of this open-minded part of the country. So we're sitting at dinner and this woman kept staring at us. And I was in a narrative. I was in this story that she's being homophobic, or why is she staring at us? And what is she doing? And at that point in my evolution, I knew enough to recognize that it might not be happening the way I thought it was. But I will tell you, I was convinced that's what she was doing. And she stood up and walked toward the table. And I noticed myself having this like rush of an emotion and this defense that came up. And she walked over and she said, "I'm so sorry to disturb you, but I just want to tell you, your family is so beautiful. And I've just loved watching the way you interact with your kids." She had a whole different thing. There was something totally different going on. And that's what we're talking about here. Yes, we're talking about on the surface, like asking questions for clarification. But Adriana, you and I are taking this much deeper. It's like, what are the core beliefs and ideas I have about myself? And is it possible that that's the projector and I'm seeing everything through that? When that happened, I didn't look at it as something bad or wrong. I didn't say, oh my gosh, look what I just did that's wrong. I said, wow, there's more healing for me to work with around sexuality, around orientation, around my own trauma of growing up gay in the Midwest. There were all these layers. So I looked at it as like, okay, that was painful that I got to see myself, but it's also the point of power, because I realized, oh, there's more healing here. And isn't it wonderful that I have the opportunity to have that healing? Now, my mind might not have been saying it at the moment, but that really is the deeper reality.
Yes, exactly. It's all grist for the mill, as I like to say. We can take any experience and learn something about ourselves from it. So I'm super grateful for that story, because I think it illustrates the point really beautifully. So let's go on to the second root cause of conflict. This one is about wanting to the need really that some people have, most of us probably have, really, to be right. What do you mean by that?
Okay, deep breath on this one, because this is the pandemic we're living in our world right now. And the pandemic I'm referring to is this need to be right. And we're seeing this played out in social media in ways that have never happened through human history. Now, this has always been happening throughout human history. The difference is we all have these devices connected with our hand right now, and I can opinionate within 2 seconds, right? Like a story can get 1 million views in I don't even know how long, but very, very quickly, and comments. And so what we want to ask is a very simple question. and this is obviously, people say this is not unique. I'm not originating this, but the fundamental question is, would I rather be right or would I rather be free? Now, some people say happy. I like freedom because when I am in the good, bad, right, wrong paradigm, when I'm unconscious of that, I'm suffering, but only 100% of the time.
Mhm.
And this need to be right is so deeply entrenched in this idea of polarization. We are being fed this idea. Let's look at America, for example, the United States. Let me correct myself. Looking at the United States, we are being told that we are a polarized country. I actually don't think we're a polarized country as much as we've been conditioned to have polarized thinking.
Mhm.
So to lean into that for a moment and say, oh, it's really centering in my point of view or the way I've been conditioned. Most of us have been trained from a very early age. This is good, this is bad, this is right, and this is wrong. Then we build coalitions around our opinions, right? That's why I stopped using the term, I want to be around like-minded people. In a deeper level, we could say yes, but what I think that means on the surface is like, oh, I want to surround myself with people that agree with me or think the way I do. And I think that there's a natural instinct, and it came from early humanity when we had to have a tribe to survive. I know,
Mhm.
Adriana, you talk a lot about reptilian brain, and that really is incredible in this conversation, because if I can find a group of people to agree with me, whether that's on social media or in my friend group, or what city I live in, what state I live in, now we're judged based on what state we live in. When I find a group of people that agree with me, it's actually creating more division than being open and starting to question my points of view.
Mhm. Yeah. And I look at this one from more of an intra-psychic perspective, meaning like if I'm trying to prove that I'm right, I've already decided subconsciously perhaps, but I've already decided I'm wrong, right?
Ah, yes.
You can't have one side of that polarity without having the other. And that's really the enslavement, is to that polarity. I often use this quote, and I know you know this one, from Rumi, the 13th century, 14th century poet, Sufi poet, that says, out beyond all ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Right. But when we're stuck on that polarity, then, either way, when you're seeking validation, I was working with a client the other day who was talking so much about seeking validation externally from family, from loved ones. But really, what that is, it's saying, I've already decided I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm not enough, and I need you to try to prove to me that I'm not that. But even if you gave me all the compliments in the world and you gave me all the validation, if I'm still holding that core false belief that I'm not enough, I'm not going to receive your compliments and validation anyways.
That's right. And it's so true. And I love that Rumi quote. And when we talk about the field, to me, and I'm assuming this is what he's talking about, it's a field of consciousness, right? It's a field of awareness that there is something greater happening than the duality that the mind and the emotions create. And I love where you're going with this, because it is true that no matter how much I get externally, if I haven't healed, and healed is an interesting word, but let's say if I haven't done some of the work of unlearning some of these core false beliefs so that I can really know my own inherent wholeness and perfection. We're not talking about perfectionism. We're talking about the blueprint. We came into the world as a whole and perfect spiritual being. We get programmed consciously and unconsciously by our caregivers to believe that there's something wrong, there's something dangerous, there's something fundamentally not right here within me. Then we develop these core false beliefs, and for many of us, then we look to the world to try to fix or change that. And it has it's crazy making, let's put it that way. I love Lori Jean Glass calls it being on the crazy train, right?
Yep.
Trying to get you to love me enough so that I can love myself is the crazy train. And I was on it for a couple decades, and it had its moments that were really fun, but ultimately it was really painful, because as you just said, the root of this is, if I am holding a core frequency that I am broken, it does not matter what happens in the outer realm. I will never be able to, the most loving partner can be standing in front of me. But if I believe I'm unlovable, I literally won't even be able to see that person.
Mhm.
literally cannot even see them as a possibility for a relationship, I'm going to find the person unconsciously to support the core false belief. We're not blaming ourselves for this. We're empowering ourselves with this idea.
Right. And I mean, to bring it back to the conflict, I mean, whenever we're doing that polarization, when we're doing that judgment, it creates separation, right? It creates a separation. You call it actually a spiritual disconnection, first and foremost from ourselves, from that authentic self, the spiritual being we came in as, who is, which is fundamentally unharmed and unharmable. I love that term, right? And then, we get into this ego kind of place with mind and emotions and all of that. And we start judging ourselves, we start judging others, and it creates separation within and without, like outside of us as well. We get separated, us versus them, right? We're right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And look at what that's created on the planet, right?
Exactly. And it's so interesting because as you're talking, I was trying to imagine my younger self listening to you. And I was looking at all the ways I would disagree with you. And so it was fun for me because my 20-year-old self would be like, well, there are things that need to change in the world. The world has all these things that are broken or damaged, and we need to make a difference. And that is both true and on another level, untrue. So let me lean into that and say what I mean. True change comes from shifting internally and not looking to the world to try to bring me something. So if you look at some of the difficult topics of the world, like let's look at like what it has been like throughout history to be in a female body on this planet. There's been some really rough moments, and there's still things happening in the world that we could look at and say are horrific. But fighting against that or making that wrong almost makes it creates more of it, right? So we've heard what we resist persists, what we push against pushes back. So then someone might say, so are you saying you just shouldn't do anything? Actually, no, but what we're saying is it starts within, it starts with me healing those wounds and those places where I believe I'm broken as the starting point. I did a talk not long ago on spiritual activism. And for a lot of activism is like, this is broken and we need to change it. We need to fight for it. Fighting for peace just hasn't ever worked. We continue to have war on the planet. So I think it's time for us to all be curious, what's creating that? How do we really shift this? And how do we usher in a new era that's not about division and fighting? Not because there's anything right or wrong about it, but because it just doesn't work.
It doesn't
If
work.
we're looking for peace, fighting for it does not work.
No, that's a polarity in and of itself, peace and
Right.
war, right? Yeah. So that really brings us to the third root cause of conflict, which is wanting others to change, right? You've already kind of spoken to that. And the thing with that, and that's a tricky one, I think that brings it back to also the interpersonal, close intrapersonal relationships that we have with family and loved ones. How often we have, and we don't even always realize it. It's subconscious. It could be like a secret agenda we have to get the other person to change, to get them to see it from our point of view, right? They're going to come around and finally see me and hear me and understand me. And they're therefore then going to do something different. And how disappointing that is to set that expectation, to project that out into the other person, expect them to be anything other than what they already are, and to make them wrong when they don't do what we think. Well, why didn't he just read my mind and know what I was thinking, right? What's wrong with him? um
Yeah.
huge source of conflict.
Yeah, and this may be the biggest source, right? And the source of suffering too, because I really, we could use interchangeably conflict and suffering, because conflict isn't only an external experience. Yes, there is conflict. People are at war. We go home for Thanksgiving or holidays, and we might push up against those buttons that were installed very early in our life. And we might have an idea, as you said, that if they could just change, I could be happy. And again, moving out of the good, bad, right, wrong of that and start to ask, what does it create? What does it create when I want mom to talk to me differently so that I can be happy? What might get created if I were to start becoming curious? And I want to also bring into the conversation compassion for self. compassion for others, right? I remember at one point I was on my way to visit my family. I was on the train and I was headed there. And then I noticed, right? Because it really is just awareness. I noticed that I was in a narrative of like, oh God, they're going to push my buttons because they're the ones that installed them. And oh my gosh, mom's going to say this, or one of my sisters will do this. And then I realized it was just this flash of insight. I'm also the button pusher, right? I'm going to go in and we're going to slip back into our roles and I'm going to say something or do something. And my mom might get what we used to call triggered. And there it is. We're in the dynamic. And so being aware that that is not only possible, but it's always happening on some level. And then moving into compassion for myself. And really, I'm sure we're going to shift into what do we do with all this. So, when I have compassion for myself, then I can start to ask what actually is getting touched, what needs to shift within me rather than the other person. You know, we hear in our culture now, it's very popular on social media, how to remove toxic relationships. What's the life hack to, you know, remove yourself from this situation, these situations. And ultimately, it's about the inner journey and how do we start to realign with something that's greater than all these buttons that keep getting pushed.
Well, yeah. And I want to speak too also to the level of disempowerment that happens when we put the responsibility for our own happiness or well being onto somebody else. That creates this where they're now up on a pedestal, they have all the power, and you're like on your knees, begging for them to, give you the stamp of approval or whatever. Like it's super disempowering to be in that position. And all it's going to do is perpetrate more of those core false beliefs. So see, I really am unlovable because, mom and dad refuses to, they refuse to acknowledge me. They refuse to validate me. They refuse to change the way they think to match what I want them to think, which is a really kind of direct way to say it. And when you say it to people that way, they're like, ooh, I don't know. But that's really what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, and I know you're an 8 on the Enneagram, so you have a really nicely direct way of saying it where someone might be like, oh my gosh, because when you just said that, I remembered how many years, and like insight can happen in a moment. And then once we have the insight, it doesn't mean, oh gosh, it's going to go away, but it means now what do I do with it, right? And I agree 100% that a lot of times we will hear people saying, I'm going to own my power. I'm going to speak my truth. I'm going to set a boundary. And usually the boundary, the way we framed it is for the other person. I'm going to tell them I will no longer tolerate this, or they cannot do this. Mm-hmm. A true boundary, if we're going to use that word, which by the way is a wall, right? A wall. And do we want a wall? If we're going to use that at all, it's going to be for me, not for them. In other words, I'm giving my power away, just like you said. If mom doesn't talk to me in a certain way, I'm unhappy, or I'm triggered, or I'm activated, or this is toxic for me, or I need to speak my truth. I need to own my power. We hear that, own my power. But true ownership of power is recognizing that someone else's words have no power over me. It's not the words that they're saying. It's what's getting touched. I can unplug from that, start to look at the possibility for healing. That's true empowerment. Oh my gosh, I don't need mom to change in order to be free. What does that create? Is that light or heavy, as you often say?
Yeah, exactly. So let's move now into that piece. I mean, I think you've set us up here really well for this conversation of what do we do with all of this? And in conscious recovery, in the latter part of the book, you talk about spiritual principles that we can begin to practice to allow us to move out of these polarized points of view, out of the core false beliefs, the misperception and all of that. So I think we start with the first one, which is living, as the question. And what does that even mean?
Yeah. So if I'm not aware that everything that we've talked about, once I become aware of that, oh, wow, it's not the words that you've said that have hurt me. It's that you've touched a wound. We're aware of that. Then we can start to question it. And starting with some really simple questions like, what am I feeling? If all of us would pause Can you imagine right now all over the world if everyone were to pause and say, what am I feeling? And actually take 15 seconds to feel it? What would happen on Twitter? What would happen, in our government? What would happen in our families? Rather than saying, you shouldn't say that, you shouldn't do that, I'm defending. So I pause and I start to question, starting with what am I feeling? Or what am I making this mean? Wow. Or how am I perceiving this?
Right.
And if we have some of our favorite questions, which I know you can share, but one of them is what else is possible here?
Yeah. And who does this belong to? Right. People forget how very aware we are, and especially those of us that identify as highly sensitive or empathic. We're constantly picking up on everybody else's judgments and everybody else's emotions. And most of the time, it's not even our stuff. But then our mind will make up a story. Well, I can feel this anger, so therefore it must be mine, and I must be angry about something. You just invented a whole drama to get wound up over, right?
Yeah.
Um, so asking a question, right? Start there. Ask, what is this? Whose is this? What's happening right now? What is, like just that time out to ask questions, because the questions empower, and the questions are opening up different possibilities. What other way is there to look at this, right? Is it possible that the person is not actually, the person across the room is not in fact staring at me? They just happen to be looking in this direction, right? What other way is there to see this? What other way? And if you can't do that yourself, I always say, ask a friend, like, how would you look at this? Like, how would you interpret this? And just to get another perspective, that often can pull us out of a fixed point of view we're holding about ourselves or others. So questions, and then other spiritual principles, non-judgment, non-resistance. Let's talk about those.
Yeah. And so noticing what judgment creates, as you said, is I think the important first step. My mantra for the last couple of years has been what gets created when and then fill in the blank, right? So what gets created when I have a judgment about what the CDC is saying, or what gets created when I have a judgment about someone wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, right? It's so easy to go into, but there is something that's right or wrong here, but we all have these differing points of view. So when I move into non-judgment, I think it's important to first look at what judgment creates. Judgment creates division. Judgment actually creates separation, right? That's kind of saying the same thing, but really a lot of it is separating from ourselves. It's not even so much that a judgment creates separation from you, which of course it does, but it also creates a separation from my own experience. It seems easier to go into judgment than to take a moment and what am I feeling? What am I making this mean? What's the origin of this? Is this something historical rather than what's happening in real time? And then when we can start to look at what the judgment creates, it becomes much simpler. Because what I'm not saying, and I'm assuming what you're not saying, Adriana, is to judge the judger, right? That's not going to help. Like, oh my gosh, I just had a judgment. Oh, I shouldn't be doing that. So then we're in more judgment, right? We're in a judgment cycle. Then when I can interrupt that with curiosity, something different can emerge.
Yeah. And I like the term allowance. To me, that is like the antidote to judgment is allowance, which is letting people and things be as they are without judgment, which does not mean being a doormat, which does not mean we don't still advocate for change, but we're doing it from a different space than that angry, resistant, walled off, right? Because we have to be able, especially I think in the world, when we look at conflict, we want to be able to see where the other person is coming from, right? And if we're so fixed in our judgments, we can't. The wall is there. It's like, la, 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 la. I'm not interested in what you have to say. That's not going to get us anywhere either. We might come to find that by lowering those walls and barriers, by asking questions, we might actually discover that what we thought was really different and now we were seeing things is in fact not, and that we're more on the same page than we realized.
Right.
I mean, so allowance may be the most caring and compassionate thing we can be for ourselves. Again, not judging ourselves, not making ourselves wrong. Okay, so I misspoke there. I stuck my foot in my mouth. Okay, I'm not going to beat myself up for it, because that's just going to perpetrate more of the core false beliefs, right?
Yeah, and you're speaking to something that's really important here, and we've talked about it. We've talked kind of around it, but I'd like to even lean in a little bit, and that is to ask the question: is there really a right and wrong in terms of a way of viewing something? I'm
Yeah.
thinking about something like, let's look at guns, for example. It's such a hot topic in our culture. There was a survey done of people in the United States, and the number one thing that Americans were looking for was security. And
Mhm.
that was across all political lines, all races, all ages. That's what emerged: security. The issue is some people, I have a family member who said, well, the only way I'm going to be secure is if I have enough guns to protect myself. Whereas
Mhm.
someone else will say the only way we're going to be secure is to get rid of all the guns. And so I can look at that. Now, a friend of mine recently said, oh, you're one of those let's meet in the middle people. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is look at how both of those points of view are valid based on the point of view itself. Can I
Mhm.
have compassion for someone? I don't have to go into agreement about it.
Right.
But look at the war on drugs. How's that going? All the drug use has escalated when we started the war on drugs, the criminalization, all of these things we can talk about because we've made something wrong and then we fight against it. There are more
Right.
guns than ever because we've been fighting against them. So I'm bringing these big political conversation or topics in, but the same exact things happen in the personal, my interpersonal relationships, and even going a little deeper, the conflict that happens internally is making myself right, wrong, good, bad, and trying to force myself to change so that I can, be okay. So, we look at this globally, we look at this interpersonally in our relationships, but then ultimately, really all of this is happening inside of us.
Right. And when we stop resisting that, when we stop pushing that away and stop putting up walls against it, I don't want to look at that. That's when we can actually get vulnerable, get honest with ourselves and look at, okay, what am I doing here with this? How am I seeing this and what is it creating? Is it creating the life I want for me to see myself or others in this way? Right? That's when change can happen. Yeah.
That's right. That's what, a perfect example of this is what I was really involved with my nephew's life when he was really young, like 18 months to 3 years. He lived with me, and he would have what we call a temper tantrum, which really was just a human being having an emotion, right? And what I noticed is if I would pause and get down on his level and just be present with him, he would and I
Hmm.
noticed that's what the nervous system needs, right? Just allowance. Talk about allowance. Most of the time people are told don't have that fit, don't have that emotion. We send kids to their room. On the most extreme cases, we hit a kid to get them to stop that. When we can just be open and honor and validate and allow, I noticed that he would calm down.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't do that so he would stop having the emotional experience. I had to be genuine with allowing him to have that emotion and not trying to interject. Wow, can you imagine a world where we do that for each other and for ourselves?
Yeah. Well, and that brings us to compassion. And I think I sort of see like compassion and forgiveness and gratitude kind of all in the same cluster, right? Because when I can have compassion for myself and others, it opens up the space to have gratitude for them, even if I don't like it, even if it's difficult. Um, and it allows for forgiveness where I'm not like enslaved to something from the past, holding a grudge. Well, you said this to me. This happens in the holidays with families, right? Oh, that one time you did this and you said that. And what's that all creating, right? When we can move out of the judgment and into allowance, that also allows compassion, gratitude, and forgiveness to take hold.
Yeah. And if we can look at forgiveness in a really different way, I'm going to kind of lean into that because in the way it's set up most of the time is deeply entrenched in this idea of right and wrong, but you've harmed me, but I'm going to find a way to forgive you. But
Mhm.
forgiveness is really a shift in consciousness. It's like it's a place of compassion. And I love what you're saying. All these work together. Gratitude. It doesn't mean bypassing the hurt or the harm that happened. Let's look at an extreme case. Maybe you're going back to a family member who was your abuser when you were growing up, sexually or physically. We're not going into like what they did is okay, right? And that's the tricky part. The mind is like, if I move into allowance and openness and curiosity, I'm going to say it was okay. Not true. What we're going to do is look at how we start to like shift this notice what emerges when I'm around this person. Maybe there's an opportunity or an openness to have a conversation. But ultimately, unforgiveness is carrying this story and giving them the power. I've worked with people, and I'm sure you have, Adriana, who have been so deeply in blame for someone that abused them. Sometimes they're not even alive.
Yeah.
And there's an idea that somehow they need to atone for their sins, if you will, or say that they were wrong. And what happens when a person dies? How do you work with that? I'm the one carrying the story and the shame. When I shift my consciousness, it's not about making them right or making them wrong. It's about looking at the impact. What were those core false beliefs? How do I start to heal them so I can return to that place of wholeness? It's a really different way of being in the world.
Yes, and a much more empowered way of being, right? Yeah, yeah. So we have some questions that have come in that I want us to go through. One person has written in, I'm having a hard time lately living with my mom and brother. Both of them require special needs, and it feels like everything becomes a conflict. I'm so stressed out and burnt out every day. And at the same time, I can't find an apartment that I like and that's on my budget to rent. How do I shift the situation and get out of conflict, even when it seems impossible to have a healthy relationship with both of them? Thank you.
Do you want me to take that one,
Yeah,
Adriana?
go for it.
You want to?
Mhm.
Yeah, there's so, it starts with compassion for self. I really do want to start with that. Yeah, I am around family, and yeah, these buttons are getting pushed, and I find myself in a situation where I feel stuck. So the questions could be really helpful here. Is it true? I think about Byron Katie's work. Is it true that I am forced to have conflict with people? I remember at one point working in the addiction treatment field, I had an amazing supervisor, and she said, if you notice you're in power struggles with clients, become curious about who's in the struggle.
Mhm.
And in other words, like if you're in a tug of war, you're not in a tug of war if we're not both pulling back. And what I'm not saying is release the rope and hope that they fall on their ass, which is tempting. But what we are saying
I do
is,
say that sometimes.
of
Drop
course,
the rope. If
to
you drop the rope,
recognize,
there's no more struggle.
right, exactly. And then to look at how much power, we're going back to the same concept. How much power am I giving the other person? And I'm pulling back on the rope, gently releasing that and becoming curious about what happens. And for me, what I notice happens is when I move away from the conflict, I then need to be aware of what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. It could be that you start to question your points of view about money and apartments and availability and all of these things, not from a place of blame or shame, but from a place of curiosity. I think curiosity is the most empowering principle that there is. Oh, I'm curious where I got the point of view that I can't find an apartment. So what I'm not saying is like, oh, I'm going to manifest a 5-bedroom apartment for $300 a month, right? That kind of thinking, but to start looking at like, oh, is it even true?
Yeah.
What makes me think that I know exactly what I need? What would it take for me to gently release this rope? I think living in the questions through curiosity can be so empowering. Then I start to see possibilities that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah. And I come back to, as you were talking, I was just thinking about myself and how I've shifted over time as I've empowered myself and like stopped seeking it externally for other people's validation. What I've noticed is it doesn't really matter so much to speak my truth, right? To be like, I'm going to tell you how it is. This is the way it is. And this is right. And I'm right. And you're wrong. Like, I've really seen myself move out of that. And I'm much more okay with telling people only what they can hear, like not impelling. Like, I'm crossing their boundaries, if you want to look at it that way. How intrusive am I being when I'm getting up in someone's face and saying, you're wrong, you should look at this a different way? What if they're not willing or able to see it that way?
Yeah.
So I've started to ask myself, right? Like, what can the person that I'm interacting with actually hear? What are they open to? What are they willing to? And if I have a point of view that they can't hear, I'm not going to say it because I already know it's going to lead to a conflict. So why would I even go there? It doesn't matter to me. It's not become, the meaning and significance of other people's opinions is less and less significant to me.
Yeah.
And
I'm also
yeah, a lot of freedom has come from that.
a lot of freedom, right? And then we start to look at this whole new way of being. And I was thinking about and Eckhart Tolle has a version of this. I've heard versions of this throughout time. We have choices when we're in a situation that's difficult. We can change the situation. We can leave the situation. We can change our perception of the situation. All else, though, is insanity. And I'm using that term really clearly because I have stayed in situations and thought, I need to make this work. I need to make them change. I need to be able to change. So it's change the situation if I can, leave the situation if I can, or change the way I'm relating to the situation.
That's where the
But
power
what
is.
I'm not going to do is stay in a situation and complain. It's like when I lived in San Francisco for 29 years and I would hear people complain about the fog. It's like, what could be more insane than living in San Francisco and complaining about the fog? I'm in LA now. If I hear someone complaining about traffic, I think, don't you know where you chose to live?
Yeah,
We have traffic.
exactly. You're not going to get the traffic to change your response
Right.
to it. Yeah,
Yes.
the practice I did with that, and I'm, yes, very type A, I'm in the left lane, get out of my way. And to tame that, I actually would sometimes force myself to go all the way over in the right lane or the next to right lane and like go slow and like notice what would come up for me, all the frustration, I'm not in control, which is a big underlying current that we haven't mentioned, but how much of this is about needing to be in control and where's that coming from? But once I realized, okay, I'm not in control of the traffic, and then I would turn on the music and I would start singing, and then like, wow, like what a shift that was to just get out of the need that I had to be in control and to make the traffic go the way I wanted it to go. Like,
Yes.
how insane
And
is that?
and just brain science, you created a new groove, right? A new experience. And with neuroplasticity, we realize now, and of course we've known this for a long time, when we do something repeatedly, we actually create a groove in the brain. That's where I've heard, that's where the term getting stuck in a groove is. We don't think about how we brush our teeth. We do it the same every day.
Right.
So we might not think about how we do relationships. We do them the same. My buttons get pushed. I'm in the left lane thinking, why won't that person get out of the left lane? I, of
Yeah.
course, relate to this conversation. So what
Yeah.
would it be like to go to the right lane and slow down and put on some music and just notice what happens? We're
Get out of
creating neural pathways.
getting out of autopilot, out of those automatic responses. Yes. Okay, another question. Thank you for this conversation. I loved the talk on Dr. Zach Bush webinar with TJ. You were recently on a talk there. We can mention that. We could even put in a link actually in the comments. That would be cool. I would like to help others and heal the lies that we bought from the past. We are also capable of love and light. Could you share some methods or practices I could use to be more of an invitation to others?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that. And I love the way you're asking the question because we really do make a difference in the world by who we are being, not what we're doing as much, right? And so it's true that we come into the world as these beautiful, whole and perfect spiritual beings, and then we get programmed. And we get programmed with cultural norms. We get programmed with our family systems, with generational trauma, what it means to be our race, our socioeconomic status, what country we're born in. We have all these programs that keep us limited. Even if they're programs that we consider great programs, that's still some kind of a limitation. So the more I'm curious and I start to unlearn, because really to me, spirituality, recovery, all of this mental wellness and healthy living, it really is about unlearning more than about learning. And I love that you talked about control, because for me, I had a lot of rigidity and control in my life. And what I discovered, it's because I felt so out of control internally. And so returning to that place of wholeness and being that love and light, as the person who asked the question, being that is what actually starts to shift the planet. My friend Michael Beckwith says, we're not here to change the world. We're here to serve the new paradigm. The new paradigm is recognizing that place of wholeness. Then we can start to be that in the world. And that not only has a ripple effect, but we know through consciousness, things start to change instantly in the world as more and more of us do that. That's what the world really needs right now. It's not one more debate about the vaccine. That's not really what is needed right now.
Correct. Yeah. And I would just go, I fully agree. And I would say, be the, the change you want to see in the world. And the more that you, heal, for lack of a better term, but work through whatever your own like internal judgments are, the core false beliefs, the more you radiate your own light. We know from quantum physics that changes the vibration of all the other molecules around us. What most of us seem to do is what I call entrain to the lowest common denominator. If I'm feeling bright and happy and I go to a party, or maybe not a party, but like I go in a room full of people and everyone's like, woo, or everyone's like all anxious, right? The tendency is I'm going to attune to that and lose connection with my own light and get caught up in everybody else's lower vibration, right? Rather than being willing to be the dominant energy. If I'm truly being in my power and I'm shining bright, I'm going to shine bright no matter what. You all can be miserable and sad and angry, but I'm going to remain light. And being that invitation for people to rise up to that energy rather than you giving yourself up to sink down to their level. That's one way. And then the other visual that came to mind when you were talking is be like water, right? Water goes wherever there's an opening. And go let your energy of light and love permeate all the cracks and fissures where there's actually an opening. And even if you don't consciously know where that is, you can be that energy. Like let the energy of yourself permeate into your business, into your home, in your building, into the community down the street, into nature, into the governments, into DC. Let's permeate our energy of consciousness into Congress and all of that. What would that create? And when there's a blockage, water just goes around it. It doesn't that necessarily, right?
I love that. And in addition to that, the importance of community, because, I talked about like-minded before. It's really more about like-spirited. And what I mean by that is finding people where we can vibrate and raise that frequency. And the person who asked the question is part of Zach Bush's community. And when I met Zach Bush, there was this recognition it was as if we had reacquainted ourselves for hundreds of years. It was this incredible moment. And then, of course, all the people that are in his orbit are these incredible beings. And then we're coming together, even virtually right now. Like, I'm not even sure who the person is asking the question. They're connected with this incredible community that is the Zach Bush community. And it's more than just that. And that's the consciousness that starts to shift the planet. Then we can unplug from the conditions of the world and plug back into how we can be that change maker or that servant of the new paradigm. I think they'll look back in 100 years and they'll say they were starting to get it. They were starting to understand that we're all parts of one, right? That we're all we're part of a greater organism. And if you look at cancer in the body, it's when the cells attack each other. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, but I think that's what happens, right? And so when we can be congruent with that, and I love the flow of energy, because when we fight against something, that resistance creates more of it. When we come together in intentional community and say, wait a minute, I'm going to unplug from that and tune into this, which is much greater, then we start to vibrate at this higher level. And wow, doors start to open where there were only walls before.
And I agree. And I would say also maybe the reason why things are coming unraveled the way that they are is because so many of us have been choosing consciousness. We are shining a light into the shadow stuff, into those dark, ugly places of conflict, of polarization, of core false beliefs. We're shining a light on that. So of course it's going to bring it up to the surface, but it's bringing it up to the surface for us to look at it and question it and shift ourselves. And that's then, yes, the ripple effect that it has on the whole planet.
Yeah, my own individual healing, there were many times I was on the floor in the fetal position sobbing because the shadow needed to emerge, because it had to heal. I had spent all these years running from it. And so if it's true that we're all one, then as Adriana has said with such, I think, wisdom and insight, that all of this is coming up so that it can heal. And it is coming up because we have become more conscious, not because we're not conscious, right? It's coming up because all of that which was in the shadow needed to come up for the healing. Now, the question is, are we going to sign up for the healing, or are we going to try to push it back down? Because in my own personal journey, I did try to push it back down, and some success, but mostly pain. And so we're looking at what are the infinite possibilities here right now on planet Earth, and we've signed up for it for whatever reason. That's my belief.
The bus is in the parking lot. We're on it. We might even be driving it. You're either on the bus or you're off, your choice, but we're going. We're going regardless of whether you're on the bus or not. I mean, we're not waiting. Yeah. Awesome. I've loved this conversation, TJ. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and the gift that you be in the world. If people want to find out more about you, about your work, where can they go?
The best place is Instagram. I'm sending people there now. It's TJ Woodward _ because there's a link there that shows everything, the books, the courses, all the collaboration I've done, the work I've done with Adriana. So that's the best place, going to Instagram. And I've loved this conversation too. You know, I could be here for hours talking about all of this and being in all of this, because this is what lights my fire, so to speak. And I'm so grateful for you saying yes to your calling too, Adriana.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So we have a feedback, I think, from Reva, who asked the question. I'm guessing that's who's sending this in. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you both. Thank you, Adriana, for introducing me to TJ and his work. I love the driving analogy. I will do that today. I will continue to be the light and invitation back to wholeness. Shine bright like a diamond. Namaste.
Oh, beautiful.
Yes. Namaste to you and to everybody who tuned in today. And we'll add some links to all the places we've talked about. And if you want to find out more, check them out. Check us out. What else truly is possible for all of us on this planet. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.